The U.S. military works tirelessly to counter threats against the country, ranging from China, Russia, and Iran, all the way down to organized terror groups. And these adversaries work tirelessly to get access to the U.S.'s most important information, their future plans. Because if you can know what your enemy is going to do before they do it, you can stop them, counter them, and come out on top. That's why it's so shocking that the highest levels of U.S. government were conducting sensitive military plans using a free app from the App Store. Just what is the problem with using Signal to conduct these kind of planning operations? And we are going to do a deep dive analysis of the actual plans themselves to try to understand how this administration is thinking about the globe. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so the overall story is that the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, a guy named Jeffrey Goldberg, dropped an article yesterday saying that he was included by accident on a group chat on Signal, where plans for American airstrikes on the Houthi militant group Yemen were discussed in great detail. It appeared to actually be some of the most detailed plans for this kind of operation. And it is troubling for a whole host of reasons. But obviously, there's a massive security failure, given that Jeffrey Goldberg is not only not cleared to be part of these kind of discussions, that there was no vetting process. It appears to have been simply an accident. Perhaps there was another Jeff Goldberg on Signal who was supposed to be added to the chat. They, possibly Pete Hegseth or another high-level official said, oh, yeah, we got to add Jeff from the Department of State or Jeff from the Pentagon Planning Office. And they got the wrong Jeff. And that, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, is why the U.S. is so bureaucratic and red tape about its security apparatus, right? Red tape often exists for a reason. Sometimes that reason is good. In this case, like have someone else double check your work before you grant someone access to the U.S.'s highest levels of planning. Or, of course, sometimes bureaucratic red tape is just bureaucratic red tape. But the problem with using Signal is that it is a free-to-play app on the App Store, right? It is no more restricted than Candy Crush. And the reason, the non-crazy person, using Signal is stupid for a bunch of reasons. First off is that a free-to-play app is not going to have the same level of security as other apps. But one of the things that the U.S. security secret networks have is what's called an air gap. An air gap means it is physically not connected to the rest of the internet, right? So, for example, right, the fact that the users here were texting on their civilian phones, right, phones with a whole variety of other contacts, is a indicator that, and they were doing it on Signal, all of which sort of indicates that these were probably just civilian phones, which means that, yeah, you say, oh, Signal is a secure app. But remember, on the App Store of your phone, there are dozens, maybe thousands or tens of thousands of other apps that are not secure. And remember, whenever you download that Level app or that fun app where you look like you're drinking a beer, they always ask for permission for a bunch of shit. And a scam app may not even ask for permission. They may simply just take permission to use your camera, take screenshots, right? Imagine, again, you're on Signal, but if you have one of those Level apps or an app to control your favorite Chinese-made drone, it's possible that they can use that app to just take screen grabs of your activities. And if they do it while your Signal chat's open, it doesn't matter how encrypted the actual app is. It's not sufficient. But what I suspect these guys are doing is actually a little more troublesome, because the appeal of using your civilian phone, using Signal, is that the communications done within that app, because they're outside of government channels, they can be avoided if you're hit with a lawsuit, right? Freedom of Information Act or other types of lawsuits that raise questions about the decision-making process, right? They may say, listen, we're going to discuss some things that would get us in trouble with the courts or just simply cannot be made public. And so we are going to use them off of a government phone. We're going to use them off of the government's official channels so that we can have sort of sidebar discussions of which there is no record. That is the reason they're using Signal. And that should itself sort of be troubling to you, right? Now, administrations throughout history have had off-the-record discussions that cannot be sort of FOIA'd or subpoenaed, but they are usually done face-to-face, right? That's the easiest way to have these. That's why everyone works inside the White House. So it is troubling enough that they're using Signal, but now there's even more trouble because they just got outed as using Signal, which means that if you're China, if you're Russia, remember, we as regular people, look how often you run into scams sort of stealing your data or whatever, right? But you're a regular person. You're not that valuable to the Russians or the Chinese. So they're just going to be like, hey, we're going to put up this scammy app. And if you download it, yeah, we'll steal your data and maybe we'll sell it to some Russian scammers who will use it to buy Solana or something. But if you're the Secretary of Defense, every country and their intelligence services are now going to work tirelessly to say, how do we worm our way into Signal? How do we, for example, maybe make a fake update that your phone thinks is a real update for Signal, where it just, again, screen grabs it and sends it straight to the CCP. Any of these things are now accessible. So just outing that the U.S. government is communicating using this method is a massive security violation, right? And again, this isn't to say don't use Signal, but this is to say that don't use Signal for sensitive military operations. I mean, it's probably a national security secret for Pete Hegseth to out where he's going to dinner, right? Like, would the Secret Service really want our adversaries to know a specific time and place that the Secretary of Defense is going to be, right? So you can imagine how much, and that's something that he probably should have a conversation on over Signal, right? Text his wife or whatever. But my God, dude, like sensitive military operations on Signal in the group chat, popping off with emojis and GIFs and stuff, absolutely insane. But that's like only one layer of the problem with using Signal to plan sensitive military operations. The actual plans themselves are even more preposterous, right? One, a spokesman for the NSC previously confirmed to Goldberg that the Signal group chat, quote, appears to be an authentic message chain, which was stupid. The NSC should not have confirmed that because they have the ability to they can at least introduce a tiny amount of plausible deniability, right? Especially because the texts themselves, as we're going to see, are a little absurd. And so the fact is the U.S. military, like, and the National Security Council managed to be like confirming these mistakes, just doubling down on them truly. Now, speaking of doubling down, by the way, before we get into the actual text of the exchange and what I think is so crazy about this planning or lack thereof, I wanted to mention a couple of things. The first is hit the subscribe button because that tells YouTube that I'm making good content. The second, of course, is that while the United States government seems to have made a heel turn against Ukraine, the American people still stand with Ukraine. And that's why UAO is having their Double Down fundraiser, right? We're working together with, really meant to send a message of America and Europe and the world united to support Ukraine against Russian aggression. Best of all, of course, an anonymous donor in the Netherlands has pledged up to $250,000 of matching donations. So for every dollar you put in, it's going to get matched by this anonymous donor. That's why the goal is $500,000. But we collectively need to raise just $250K. So if you've been thinking about it, right, now is definitely the time, especially because we're going to, obviously, this huge a fundraiser is going to go to a wide variety of units, but notably, it's going to go to the GUR, the Artan team. I met these guys. These guys are hard as fuck, dude. I don't know what else to tell you. They are some of the baddest dudes in the entire Ukrainian military. In fact, they're not even in the military. They're from their military intelligence wing. So this is roughly the equivalent of like the CIA Special Activities Division. So if you donate $250, you'll get a patch from the Artan team of the GRU, right? And the irony is, of course, you know their symbol here is the owl, and you guys know that the owl is significant to the GUR because the Russian FSB, their symbol is a bat. And if you guys know your nocturnal birds, you know that owls snack on bats the way you and I snack on Lay's. Lay's, you could sponsor me if you want. And so, if you want a badass patch from literally one of the baddest units on the planet, right? $250 donation. Help these guys out, and you'll know that you didn't just get the patch from buying it on Etsy. You got it from the source, and you got it because you helped put a drone in their hands, right? And that, I think, is significant, especially now, because that $250 donation gets matched. $500 is about what it costs to put an entire FPV drone together out into the field. Huge difference maker for these guys. So that link is in the description. And of course, Strike Gum, guys. You guys know it. I'm a dad. I'm still training as an athlete. It's hard. It's hard running a YouTube channel, trying to be a present father, husband, and still get my training in. I need every advantage, every edge I can get. And that's why I created Strike Gum, right? Inspired by my time in the military when I drink energy drinks to sustain myself on long combat patrols. But now it's for anybody who wants that extra boost of energy. I found a way to work with a manufacturer here in the United States to get literally 90 milligrams of caffeine into a single piece of gum with zero sugar. So if you're interested in getting an entire energy drink's worth of caffeine in just a piece of gum that you can pop, go, and crush it, go to strikegum.com. The link is in the description. By the way, I know that 50% of you guys that order one piece reorder, which tells me I've got a great product. Obviously, I knew that from the jump, but you guys are confirming it. But if you are, guys, do your subscribe and save. We have the subscribe and save, right? You can cancel whenever you want. Get the 5-pack. Do the subscribe and save. Get your 20% off. Why not save the money? Anyway, that link is in the description. Okay, let's break down what these guys said in their signal chat. So, one, I thought it was interesting because this revealed who are the real key decision-making team around some of these sensitive issues, right? And what was discussed particularly, one, the Atlantic said they kept some details secret for security reasons, which is courteous of them, right? Including, for example, the name of one of the individuals added who was a CIA officer who was responsible for sort of the coordination piece for these strikes on Houthi targets that were being discussed, right? And so what was interesting is here's who we saw in the text. And these were from about a week ago, right? You had White House National Security Advisor Mike Walls. You had Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Brian McCormick for the National Security Council, CIA Director John Ratcliffe. And these guys, what it seems to have happened is they all chimed in with who their designated sort of person, their point man was going to be in this operation, right? Tagging who was going to be able to represent them. And, right, of course, the CIA director naming a CIA official who the Atlantic redacted. But again, the problem is, right, one, there's no guarantee that the Atlantic won't be polite next time, especially given the fact that in exchange for their pretty high level of courtesy, honestly. Because remember, they sat on these for a week or two while the operation took place to not jeopardize U.S. national security. And they continue to redact the name of the CIA officer, which, again, is not something they're required to do. And then the president went and just totally took a shit on the Atlantic, which is not a great vibe because next time this happens, and unfortunately it probably will happen again, there's no incentive now for these outlets to be even marginally courteous. But this is what's fascinating, is that the group chat also involves, let's see if we can find who else was in here, Stephen Miller, White House Chief of Staff, as well as Steve Witkoff, and Susie Wiles. So really interesting just to see that this is kind of the core decision-making group, right? That is doing this day-to-day operations, at least for U.S. national security policy. But here's where things get really interesting, is what was said. Okay, so we're going to go from top to bottom, right? These guys, right, open the chat. They say establishing a principals group, right, for the coordination on Houthis, particularly over the next 72 hours. And then White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says, okay, my deputy Alex Wong pulling together a Tiger team of deputies and agency chief of staff level following up from the meeting in the situation room this morning for action items that we'll be sending out later this evening. Please provide your point of contact to coordinate over the next couple days. Thanks. Standard stuff. President makes a decision. He provides broad guidance to his key decision makers. They say, listen, let's rope in the best experts to kind of hash out the details of this particular plan. And then they proceed to say, okay, I'm going to put into writing the person that I want to be the lead on this. Very standard stuff. This makes it clear so there's no confusion over who at state, at the vice president's office, at the intelligence, directorate of national intelligence, who is responsible for these. Now, I'm rolling my eyes at Scott Bessent, but actually, again, when you're talking about this kind of thing, the Treasury Secretary does have a pretty significant foreign policy role, particularly because they're responsible for things like sanctioning. Now, it's not clear that the Houthis are really sanctioning the Houthis is going to be essential for Treasury, but there is, it's later revealed, a pretty significant economic modeling aspect to this. And there is actually they do out that they're planning on literally sending someone a bill for this. Now, the next time they say teams, you should have a statement of conclusions with tasking per the president's guidance this morning in your high side inboxes. High side means secret, right? And state and DOD developed a notification list for allies and regional partners. So this is who we're going to tell ahead of time. Standard stuff, right? Joint staff sending it a more specific sequence of events in the coming days. We'll work with DOD to ensure the chief of staff and the office of the vice president and the president are briefed. So again, this is really just standard kind of organizational stuff. And remember, Mike Walls, former Green Beret, this is exactly the kind of organization and thinking that you would expect from someone like this. So it's very interesting to see. Again, this seems like there's a pretty good economic leadership, or rather, Mike Walls. I have said repeatedly, seems to be one of the more competent professional people in the administration. So it makes sense that he is in fact leading on taking kind of the lead on this. But what's interesting is that JD Vance says, team, I am out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan. He adds, but I think we are making a mistake. Credit to JD Vance. Communicating clearly and unapologetically, right? Because there's nothing more annoying than saying something cagey. Like, I'm not so sure about this, guys. I'm not so sure about this is not the same thing as I think we're making a mistake, right? So credit where credit's due. JD Vance is a smart guy and does not allow for miscommunication over text. He continues, I'm not sure the president is aware of how inconsistent this message is on Europe right now. So I think this is very polite speak for saying the president doesn't realize that he is getting sideways on his policies, right? Because the president issues this guidance and JD Vance says, we need to massage the president a little bit to get him on point, right? To get him to understand that he's off message. He says there's a further risk that we will see moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team to keep these concerns to myself, right? But there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, et cetera, right? So I think this is really interesting because we saw JD Vance kind of operate in this role in the showdown with President Zelensky, where Vance was literally close to the president because he is positioning himself as kind of a Trump whisperer, as being able to contextualize and sort of screen the president and make sure that the information fed to the president is, well, the less nice way is he's going to lead the president in the direction that the team wants him led. Now, to be clear, guys, every organization with a singular head, this is what their chief of staff type of people do. They control the information that the boss has access to the extent possible in order to make sure that the boss cannot reach insane conclusions. And I've seen this so many times with bosses who range from very incompetent to highly competent, right? But one human brain can only process so much information, so many factors spinning around. And that's part of what you want a staff to do, is to distill out the bullshit, distill the choices down to, hey, here's A and here's B, or here's A, B, and C, and here are the costs associated with each, right? The risk, of course, is that your staff is going to say, actually, there was an option D, and maybe it would have actually been a good option, but their own personal biases say, don't worry about option D. But that's like intrinsic to the human experience. But JD Vance is unusually able, it seems, or seems to be positioned as this guy who can really speak to the president and really get him to see the light on an issue. And so I think him saying, listen, why are we back? One, he says, why are we backing up the Europeans? Because targeting the Houthis, remember the Houthis guys target ships in the Red Sea. The Red Sea provides a ton of shipping traffic that goes into Europe. The United States, not so much. It does a little bit, but really the Red Sea is a European-centric commercial avenue. And so he says, listen, if we are not consistent about holding the Europeans responsible for their own defense, right? Also, there's a risk that we're going to see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices, right? And so what he's saying is, these are the things that I can raise to POTUS and get him to walk away from this. He says, I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, which is again, a good managing up role. And there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why it matters, and seeing where the economy is, etc. Right? Joe Kent chimes in and says there's nothing time-sensitive driving the timeline. We'll have the exact same options in a month, right? And here's where things get really interesting. JD Vance tags Pete Hegseth and says, if you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing out Europe again. And let's make sure our messaging is tight here. If there's things we can do up front to minimize risk to Saudi oil facilities, we should do it. Pete Hegseth responds, VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike is correct. We are the only ones on the planet on this side of the ledger who can do this. This being strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. And this is true, right? At the end of the day, the Europeans, remember, to hit these targets in Yemen and the Red Sea, you have to have an aircraft carrier deployed within range. You have to have intelligence detailing these targets. And that requires satellites and human beings on the other end processing that information. And then you have to have those planes take off, strike the targets, return to the carrier, right, and conduct a battle damage assessment. While you say, oh, there's other nations with aircraft carriers, there are none with that capacity in the Red Sea, and there's none with the sufficient intelligence apparatus. Sometimes the United States will sit there and go, hey, Israelis, can you guys do this? Sometimes they'll have people like the Jordanians do it, but honestly, the optics of a Middle Eastern, an Arab country bombing another Arab country, or even the Israelis bombing an Arab country, just looks really bad. And so it's almost like everyone agrees that this is just a thing the U.S. does. So that's why they say, listen, nobody else can do this. The Europeans are again begging the United States to bail them out. And this is really fascinating because this is a reminder of one of the things that I always say is that nothing is in isolation, right? So us willing to go here and use our military to clear the seas for the Europeans to ensure they can maintain a steady flow of trade. In exchange, the Europeans, well, they say they're not going to offer us anything, right? Right. So they say, question is timing. I feel like now is as good a time as any given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go, but POTUS still retains 24 hours of decision space. Someone else chimes in. As I heard, the president was clear. Green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. Example, if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain extracted in return. This is from Stephen Miller, right, who is known to be a pretty isolationist guy, pretty xenophobic by some accounts, by a lot of accounts. But I think this is so transactional. And this is one of the differences between this administration and previous administrations, is that the U.S. doesn't keep score, but we ask for a lot of favors, right? So, the U.S. could say, listen, Europe, we want to maintain, you got to lay off, some economic gain extracted in return is interesting. Usually this is more like sort of back and forth, right? Usually this is more like, it's more like you're really good friends, right? With your friends, you'll sit there and go, I'll cover this round, you get the next round. But with really good friends or family members or like a sibling, you go, listen, we don't keep score. Let me get these rounds. You'll make up for it because, when push, you'll be able to pick up my kid from daycare. And we don't sit there and go favor for favor. We go, listen, when I can help you, I help you. When you can help me, I help you out. And sometimes all you want to do is just get an acknowledgement, a recognition. Europe say, dude, thank you guys. I know things have been tough. Things have been rough between us. Thank you guys. But this idea that suddenly we're going to send Europe a bill, that we're going to send everyone a bill for everything is absurd. Why? Because once you start billing your friend, imagine if you sent your cousin a bill every single time you picked up their kid from daycare, every single time you came and helped them fix their car, right? At some point, the cousin's going to go, listen, if you're going to send me a bill every time, I'm just going to go to a mechanic. Or I'll just learn to do it myself, which is part of what they want. But the problem is you go, well, my cousin's a carpenter and he does all the repairs in my house for free. And all I had to do was pick up his kid. I live 5 minutes from his daycare. And so this sort of back and forth is something that, again, to me, it represents a downgrade in the thinking between the relationships, right? Now, again, I'm open to the counter argument, which says that maybe the Europeans are literally like a freeloading cousin. They're literally like, you pick up their kids from daycare, you're the one who covers their drinks, you do all this stuff, and they don't do anything for you. They come to your house and they eat your food, and they think they're great guys. But generally, the problem is Europe represents some of the US's largest trading partners. They represent a willingness to do a lot with the United States. Remember, they supported us through 20 years of war in Afghanistan. They supported us diplomatically and militarily through large portions of Iraq, particularly the UK. And so remember the U.S. Special Forces that were attacked and killed in Mali, right? Many of those soldiers were killed. Do you ever read the report of that? Who bailed them out? In fact, within 4 hours of that incident happening, right, when that Green Beret team was under direct imminent threat, French Mirages came on station and saved them, right? They flew them in from Mali. They diverted French aircraft and put them overhead and got those jihadists to scatter, saving dozens of American soldiers' lives. And so that kind of thing, right, is not going to work if you live in the world of send them a bill, right? The French are going to go, yeah, we could send a Mirage. But it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. Once you send it, you got to pay some up front. You got to pay for the fuel up front, and then we'll maybe scramble it. Right now, you've taken what was a 2 hour, 4 hour out, wings up on station, and now it's going to be 2 days, 3 days. Now the U.S. has to do it themselves, right? Our friends matter. So again, this idea that we're going to extract economic gain is kind of insane. Now, they probably extract some gain, but again, it's like doing a favor for your family. The gain will come back sooner or later. Now, Hegseth continues, VP, I understand your concerns and fully support you raising it with POTUS. Okay, interesting. Important considerations, most of which are tough to know how they play out. Economy, Ukraine peace efforts, Gaza, etc. I think messaging is going to be tough no matter what. Nobody knows who the Houthis are. Why we need to stay focused on two key messages. Biden failed and Iran funded. Again, this is actually one of the things that I've said and represents some awareness from Pete Hegseth, because one of the things that I've talked about is that, a good Secretary of Defense, a good head of any large agency like the Pentagon, nobody is going to have a complete set of skills. There is no such thing as someone with decades of experience in all areas, right? Maybe somebody is going to head the Pentagon from a contracting and knows acquisitions really well, but doesn't have that much tactical time. Maybe somebody has a lot of tactical time, but really doesn't understand the economics, the management part, right? Executing a budget, forecasting, that sort of thing. Nobody comes in with all the skills. So what you do is you say, listen, I'm top rated at X and Y and Z, and I'm going to make sure my deputies are fill in the gaps. And so Pete Hegseth, if he's smart, he's not the best at operations. He's never done contracting, logistics. He's never even led a large organization, but he is an expert at global messaging. He knows being in front of a camera. He knows how to get clicks. And so for him to sit there and go, I'm going to handle the messaging, that aspect of this military operation is huge. And that actually, to his credit, represents some self-awareness, right? He said he adds waiting a few weeks or month does not fundamentally change the calculus. 2, immediate risks on waiting. This leaks and we look indecisive. They don't really look indecisive. They look thoughtful. Israel takes action first. That's a problem. Or Gaza ceasefire falls apart and we don't get to start this on our own terms. Also, a real problem, right? He says we can manage both. Well, the ceasefire did fall apart. So, we're prepared to exit. If I had final go or no-go vote, I believe we should. This is not about the Houthis. It's about two things: restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest, which is true. The U.S. also gets a lot of its allies. Even if you don't care about the Europeans, the Saudis definitely do it. And reestablish deterrence, which Biden cratered. Well, we've talked about this. I think there might be a little truth to that. He says, but we can easily pause. And if we do, all we can do is enforce 100% OPSEC. I welcome other thoughts. Whoops. That's pretty embarrassing, actually. Walls adds, it's now or several weeks from now. It will have to be the United States that reopens these shipping lanes. Per the president's request, we are working with DoD and state to determine how to compile the costs associated and levy them on the Europeans, which is annoying. Right? JD Vance, if you think we should do this, let it go. I just hate bailing out Europe again, right? And it is I understand the annoyance of but again, I'm maintaining that having strong relationships with your biggest trading partners, particularly when you are being maximally hostile to someone like the Chinese, does confer some advantages, right? You can't piss off the whole world. You can't piss off every trading partner that you have. Because remember, in terms of, let's see if we can find it here, right? Largest U.S. trading partners, 2024. Let's see. There should be an infographic. Yeah, here we go. America's most important trading partners, trade relationships. Okay. So here's the thing to remember. Mexico, well, remember, we actually export and import just about evenly to Mexico. Fascinating. And we import-export just about evenly to Canada. And so this is interesting because you can see that these two people have been really pissed off by the United States, by the U.S. government. China, we import a lot from China and we export very little. But again, there's some when people talk about a service economy, well, China's its own thing because it should be paying for U.S. intellectual property, but it doesn't. It steals the intellectual property, pays nothing, clones it, and then sells it back to the United States. So again, China is its own animal, but it is as powerful a trading partner as Mexico and Canada, right? Our next biggest one is Japan and followed by Germany. So you can see in the top 10, you're looking at European countries, Switzerland, UK, and Germany. So this whole context of, hey, the Europeans, we bail them out. You see how if you want to confront China, right, you're going to have to make sure that your relationships with Mexico, Canada, Japan, Germany, South Korea, and the UK, that those relationships are tight. Those relationships are solid, rock solid. Because if you get confrontational with China and you drop this proportion, right, let's say you've got to find 3-4% of your trade somewhere else. So you can see how these kind of this kind of, we bail out the Europeans. It's like, not really, guys. You're going to need them. You're going to need them to become trading partners. And if you want to really put the screws to China, you're going to have to ask the Europeans to say, don't trade with China. And that you would need to do hundreds of favors to justify this. So again, I think this is short-sighted thinking, this whole like Europe bad, right? Stephen Miller says, as you heard it, the president was clear, green light, but we soon made clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement, right? We talked about this. Pete Hegseth agrees. Then they added a team update. According to Goldberg, Hegseth posted a team update, which included, quote, operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. J.D. Vance replying, I'll send a prayer for victory. Goldberg said Mike Waltz later reposted another update describing the attacks as an amazing job, though he chose not to share details for security reasons. So again, they out a whole bunch of secret details about exactly how the U.S. did things, which is absolutely insane. You can see Mike Waltz dropping some fire emojis, right? Everybody high-fiving each other saying, this did well, we did good. Kudos to all, most particularly those in theater. And CENTCOM, really great, God bless. And so, again, the fact that U.S. national security secrets are being basically held off by Jeff Goldberg. And by the way, I can promise you, after this dropped, every one of Jeff Goldberg's machines and devices got absolutely sandblasted by Chinese and Iranians, thinking that there might be more there, that he might still have access, or trying to get access to, again, just this perspective of, hey, if you know what the U.S. is using, you might be able to infer something about its stockpiles or its arsenals or its satellites, or if you know when the U.S. was looking at these targets, for example, if you say, okay, here's the exact places in Yemen they were looking, and here's about when they were looking at it, well, we can infer that the satellites we see overhead, we know that they're government satellites, and we know what they do is observe targets. And for the Chinese or the Iranians, they're going to say, oh, okay, well, next time we see those satellites overhead, we know to hide our stuff because they're reconnaissance satellites. So all of this key information that our adversaries would love to have is being held together by the courtesy of Jeff Goldberg from The Atlantic, right? Now, former CIA Director Leon Panetta pointed out that, quote, this was a very serious mistake, quote, that could violate the espionage laws, but more importantly, undermine our national security. Of course, Donald Trump saying, I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. This is not true. The Atlantic is profitable, actually, for the first time in a long time. But I know nothing about it. You're saying they had what? And then Goldberg said he voluntarily left the Signals group chat and is unable to report any additional conversation. It's unclear if there will be an investigation into what went wrong. No investigation needed, guys. We can see exactly what went wrong. Sensitive information, sensitive national security discussions happening over a free app on the Play Store. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to all of you guys, all of my members here, particularly Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, guys, Martin, Eugene Quester, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karis, L90, Petra Tororo, Jalen Gal. You guys know we're dropping another video today. We're going to check out the 3rd Assault Brigade's assault on the town in the north, and we're going to break down just what the tactics are looking like for the Ukrainians. Anyway, see you guys. Cheers.